From Informa Tech Target, I'm David Essex, and this is Enterprise Apps Unpacked. In the past month, worries about AI-driven job loss have reached almost a fever pitch. These aren't baseless fears or misguided perceptions. In that short time, there's been a flood of evidence that the trend of AI taking people's jobs away is in fact accelerating. Amazon announced it was cutting 14,000 corporate jobs. It didn't explicitly connect the cuts to AI automation, but said it must get leaner to be able to invest more in AI. And back in June, the CEO did say the workforce will shrink as the company embraces AI. Target and UPS made similar announcements, but it was software companies, including Salesforce, that tied some of their layoffs directly to turning over certain tasks to AI. It got to the point that the news website Axios warned about an imminent AI jobs apocalypse. Amid all the hype about the promise of AI and reassurances from vendors and their major customers that it will eventually create more jobs than it eliminates, it can be hard to find truly knowledgeable experts with a more skeptical view. So I asked my colleague Ben Lukovich for help identifying potential guests for the podcast. Today's guest, Shannon Waite, brings a perspective to the AI issue that isn't heard often enough. In 2021, while working in a data center in South Carolina run by a company that had a contract with Google, she noticed the pay rate for contractors like her wasn't comparable to what Google employees got for the same work. The working conditions weren't great, and the advancement opportunities weren't what she was led to believe. She joined the Alphabet Workers Union and started organizing her coworkers. The company found out and suspended her with pay. But then she and the union filed an unfair labor practices action and won, and she got her job back. Shannon's victory was big news. On its website, the BBC called her the woman who took on Google and won. Now she works full-time as a senior organizer for the union and leads its legislative political program. Her original organizing was on behalf of the people who labor in the hothouse-like data centers that are needed for AI's tremendous data processing and computing needs. But she's also been hearing from workers who are concerned about losing their jobs to AI. In the podcast, she emphasizes the importance of giving a voice to workers who are strongly impacted by AI and helping them unionize for better pay, benefits, and working conditions. She also goes into detail about other jobs you might not know about that are behind those fast, accurate Google searches and AI overviews, as well as state and federal legislation she's worked on. And she shares new survey data and explains why an AI agreement between the AFL-CIO and Microsoft is a hopeful development. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to Enterprise Apps Unpacked for the real story on the software that runs your business. Shannon, it's really great to meet you.
Great to meet you as well, David.
And thanks for coming on the podcast. In recent weeks, there's been a rash of news about big layoffs at companies, major brands, who tied at least some of the cuts to automation from using AI. It got to the point where the writers at Axios, which is this online news site, they were talking about an AI jobs apocalypse. And they implied that this was reaching a tipping point and maybe people weren't aware of how quickly it was happening. Amazon, Target, and UPS were the three most prominent examples, but actually in my research I found that the most explicitly AI-driven ones were actually at software vendors like Klarna, Duolingo, and Salesforce. And the irony there is Salesforce makes customer service software, and I think customer service folks were a lot of the folks being let go from Salesforce. So what was your reaction when you heard about these layoffs and that AI was part of the cause?
I guess I just want to say, I wasn't surprised. We're living in a time where the buzzword that makes most of these huge tech companies' stock tickers go up are layoffs. So UPS stock went up when they laid off a bunch of Teamsters. So as we gear up towards the holiday season, I think it's also connected to the way that UPS lobbies against automated truck driving in California. These things are all related. So I think When people think about AI, they think innovation, cure cancer. We're going to move America into a new age and try to beat China in this race. Those are the talking points. When in reality, the talking points should be layoffs, job losses. We're streamlining shopping through Chat GPT instead of curing cancer. So I think like when those who have the most money and the most resources to make something like this possible are pushing this narrative, they're not going to highlight the negative implications of the technology. And by effect, we're all just going to experience that. I just can't say, sadly, that I was surprised to see that those layoffs were so insurmountable.
So in 2021, you joined the Alphabet Workers Union, which is part of the Communications Workers of America, or the CWA. And when you worked for a company that contracted with Google and had started noticing that the work conditions and advancement opportunities weren't what you were led to believe, you started organizing your coworkers. The company noticed this, to say the least, and you were suspended with pay. But then you and the union filed an unfair labor practices action and won. You got your job back. What lessons from that effort do you think could benefit workers in other industries like finance, marketing, and customer service who are already experiencing some of the biggest job cuts from their work being taken over by AI?
It's really cool to see that Wells Fargo has so many branches starting to organize through CWA for union recognition and a contract campaign. I think if we look at the period of time from post World War II until Reagan, most of the unionized shops are manufacturing, logistics, transportation, teachers, things like that. And then after Reagan, the narrative was really dwindling on unions, and they coupled that narrative on unions are bad, unions are the extra wing of the Democratic Party, whatever they say, they coupled that with offshoring those jobs. So people in power decided we're going to offshore your jobs. And that is our way of trying to dismantle unions in the United States. Then in the late 90s, the tech industry and the internet were starting to take off. And with that new industry comes no unionization in there because of the fact that it's new. So we replaced a heavily unionized industry with something that is similar. We're still creating products, we're still a part of an assembly line. It just looks different. Now we are catching up and trying to bring labor into the tech industry. And I think the finance industry, fintech, they're not that different from trying to organize at Google because as tech workers and as people in finance, we tend to think that we're special and we're protected and that we have it easy. Just because they're the ping pong table in your workplace doesn't mean that you are any better off than someone who is making minimum wage or low wages in any other sector. So the only way to protect your workplace and your coworkers and your family is to create a relationship between you and the employer where you have a say over those things. And the way to do that is through unionizing your workplace. And when I decided to start organizing at Alphabet in the Google data center that I worked at, I tried all of the other things before that. I tried discussing with management that I think it is messed up that I'm making $15 an hour as a contract worker while my Google coworkers are making $77,000 a year plus bonuses doing the same work as me. Like, why do we have these disparities? And I was calling these questions out. And it wasn't until I joined AWU and started organizing there that I realized, hey, they don't want to give you a real answer. And you have to bring them to put them on the back of their heels to get them to own up and say, what it is. They just don't want responsibility as your employer. They want to make sure that they're able to maintain a labor force that is expendable so that when it's time for cuts, they can make those easily. I don't see there to be any difference in the finance industry. And for that reason, people in the banking sector, fintech, they should organize. They should go to an organizer training, learn from the basics, start from scratch, start talking to their coworkers because you're closer to losing everything than you are to being the next Elon Musk, truly.
Mhm. You've been involved in organizing workers called raiders who work for companies contracted by Google. Can you talk a bit about what that job entails and why they needed someone to advocate for them to get better pay and working conditions?
Yeah, so Raider, they're basically testing, prompt engineering, trying to break Google Gemini or Google search engine. And there's the Raiders at other companies like Amazon, Meta, like if it has AI incorporated in the application or anything like that, there are people behind it who are testing it and judging if it's accurate or if there's enough source behind it to actually give those splits some merit. So I've been organizing Raiders since 2021 because when I started organizing with Alphabet Workers Union, I knew Google had a minimum wage standard of $15 an hour for all of their extended workforce. That's their contractors. And these folks testing at the time, Google search and ads were making $9 an hour. And I was in the US and I was shocked. Like I thought, don't they have standards? What are different about these people? They're still W-2 employees. I don't get it. We started organizing to bring them into Google's minimum standards, which are $15 an hour and other things like healthcare and sick time and things like that. And by February of 2024, they did win a $15 an hour raise. We had a meeting with their CEO, and we did all of this without an actual union contract. We simply did this by putting pressure on not just the supplying company, Appen, but also on Google to say, hey, you have these standards. You tout yourself to the rest of the world as like some wonderful, jovial, nice employer who treats your employees right. We're giving you an opportunity to fix this. Like, here it is. Give these people a raise. And they were given a raise to $15 an hour. So it was nice to see that organizing working out in real time and people actually winning material changes to their job. The biggest issue with raters and data workers and content moderators and content writers throughout not just the United States, but throughout the world is that these contracts are so fleeting. So any threat to their bottom line and Google's bottom line or Meta's bottom line or X or whoever, you are risking cutting a contract and getting a lot of workers like who are working for those companies laid off because the companies can easily just shift the work around. It is a modern form of offshoring, but also the threat of outsourcing, period, is the mechanism that these major tech companies are using to actually put these workers in a position to where it's almost impossible to organize under like the old age of creating a bargaining unit and sitting at the table with the employer and fighting for a contract. Like, we have to do it as a collective, wall to wall, cross company group of people and find a way to share their concerns and fight for the changes that they want to see.
This Raiders job, and you mentioned offshoring a minute ago, it reminds me of a 60 Minutes segment I saw, I guess, a few months ago now, about overseas workers, mostly overseas. I think there might have been some US folks in there, whose job it is to type in descriptive labels for images so AI can recognize them. And I had no idea at the time that there was this kind of brute force, repetitive, very labor intensive job behind image searching, even though we do a small amount of labeling at my company. So I guess I should have known that it's necessary. But this is a huge amount of work. The volume was just incredible, I remember. In light of what you've said about Google data center workers like yourself in your former job, these seem to be almost like modern day sweatshops where underpaid, overworked people have to really toil behind the scenes to make this product that we can just buy fairly cheap in stores in the case of clothing, or use for free in the case of Google, but at great profit to the owners and executives of the companies selling those products. It's almost like it's the dirty secret, not so secret anymore, of the big tech industry.
Well, it's funny because a lot of people think Google Photos, Google Search, all of that is free because we use it and it's just on our phones. We don't pay out of our pocket for it, but we are paying for it. First of all, you're paying for something like that through your electric bill. A lot of people who live in areas near data centers, their electric bills and their water bills are actually going up and they're subsidizing some of these projects. And in other ways, we're paying for the ability to use these products through unpaid labor. So people who are doing that data labeling, whether you're in the US or in Kenya, you're not making an hourly wage where I worked 40 hours a week doing this work. I got 40 hours of paid work. There's periods of time where the work isn't available and they're not getting paid for that. So maybe if you did 2 hours of work and you sat there for 10 hours that day looking for that work, that is like an abhorrent and shameful wage that these companies and the staffing agencies are paying. So it comes at a price. Some of the people that I've talked to doing this work are rationing medicine for autoimmune diseases while taking care of their parents. I had a disabled veteran who was going blind and she had some neurological issues and she began to lose access to the work because there would be long periods of time where she needed to take care of herself medically and lost access to the systems to do this work. And they're suspended by what is probably an AI just for not being present, even though they filed FMLA or whatever it is. Like these things that we're using and taking for granted are not free. People are paying for it, not just with their health and with their own inability to meet their needs, but with their mental health. You may go on YouTube and never see any graphic or sexual content because somebody is labeling that for you ahead of time and they're not given any access to mental health resources. I just think like on an international level and a local level, these are the things that need to be highlighted because we call them ghost workers. Like they're unseen while doing this work. And it's just really the companies, they should be embarrassed.
Mhm. I feel like suddenly feel like a real first worlder with a small problem because when I was thinking it's not free, I was thinking we're paying the price as users because they have our information and the cookies and then the bombardments with ads. But as you pointed out, it's much more serious than that. There's other people paying a bigger price, really. Yeah. Now, if I understood you correctly, you have also heard from people who work in AI, but they're worried about their own jobs being replaced. So we've been talking about people who are behind the scenes in data centers and other aspects of AI doing the labeling and the rating. And then there's people who maybe their job can be automated by AI. So I'm wondering, are these other people that I think you're in touch with, are they just having generalized fears or maybe seeing the writing on the wall, or do they already have hard evidence that more of their tasks are being turned over to AI, and maybe there's even people in similar jobs to them that are already being laid off?
Well, there's definitely hard evidence, and I'll touch on that in just a second. That's your little spoiler alert. But I will say that we did this research, data workers and raters and people training and testing AI across the board. So I'm talking Google, Meta, X, Scale AI, OpenAI, Amazon. We surveyed over 150 people who are doing these jobs for these companies. And we also learned what suppliers or staffing agencies that they're actually being paid by. And we interviewed around 15 or so one on one, getting a feel for the more serious and the more, like well rounded picture of what they're going through and doing these jobs. And out of that survey, we learned that 52% of these raters or data workers, they feel that they're creating a product that is replacing other jobs. And 36% believe they're creating a product to replace their own jobs. And even if job replacement isn't the bar, we're seeing that AI is being used in gig work style app to underbid on who gets that work. So, for instance, there's an app where nurses can find work, like travel nurses or just nurses who are filling in for understaffed hospitals. And they put in to the app how much money they want to make that night hourly. And the app will choose, similar when you're trying to like bid on flying first class or business class on an international flight, the app will choose whoever bid the least. And so I just think like we're looking at a new wave of exploitation across the board thanks to AI. I'll go back to my spoiler alert on the replacement. So some of these raters are training automated version of what they do, and they are aware of it, and some are not aware of that. But I have verified with a couple of people who worked on that tool. That is what the goal of that tool is, to automatically rate search inquiries. And that is writing on the wall, if I ever saw writing on the wall before.
Yeah, it's occurred to me that when employees are asked to use an AI tool a lot and use it more and more, it might be, I don't know if I'm being paranoid, as much to train the tool as it is to help the employee, because we know that these things need to learn from getting feedback and just being used a lot. That's how the AI tool learns. So, yeah, it's not ideal in some ways. So, companies that are adopting AI in a big way, and also the vendors who make AI products, will often say that people whose jobs are cut back in some way or just eliminated altogether will be freed up for higher value work that only humans can do. And in many cases, they'll be trained for these new roles. Do you place any stock in those reassurances?
No, a good theory that I draw on politically and economically is that as companies make more money, the profits should go back to the workers. There shouldn't be this abhorrent and obscene gap of wealth between those doing the work and those who own the means of production. But when it comes to the automation and AI replacing different forms of work, ideally that should free you up not just to do other quote unquote more important work, but it should free you up to take more vacation time, more leisure time to develop yourself. And these things are being talked about in the 20th century by scholars as automation was coming into the industrial revolution. So those things aren't really happening. People are just getting laid off, as you brought to everyone's attention at the beginning of this call. And more disturbingly, the jobs that are being replaced by this are things that are either unseen or seen as feminine by society. So administrative, even like tutoring and learning jobs and just things that traditionally are a female dominated field. Those are the things that are seen as less important by people who are pushing these things out. And so I just find there to be a lot of intersections here with what's going on. We got to look at this through not just a good class lens, but also how this is impacting women and minorities in the US and across the world.
Mhm. So this notion of upskilling people for other kinds of work, it has occurred to me a lot that because of the challenges, and we do some coverage of like technology for workplace learning, retraining, automated stuff, online learning, all that. It's a big challenge to figure out what those other skills are going to be, what the jobs are going to be, and then workflows might have to change. So when I think about all those complications, I think, well, wouldn't it just be easier for companies to grab the quick savings from cutting staff from the AI automation and not bother with the possibly more expensive long-term process of training people for these new jobs?
Well, I think when you consider the fact that the people who are creating these tools are facing really the serious working conditions, seriously bad, for lack of a better word. And that is resulting in inaccuracy and issues with these products. In our survey, we found that most of the people who are training AI feel that they are training something, too quickly or inaccurately. It doesn't create a good product. So you want to replace people who are able to adapt and learn with something that is actually just not great. And that to me, I can never understand that. And then secondly, something that politicians say all the time is we're creating jobs. So every presidential debate, every 4 years, there's the question of how many jobs they created during their time as governor or senator or congressman. We're actually pushing a technology that is supposed to replace jobs, and that's something to be proud of. I have a lot of skepticism around the genuineness of that, and also the notion that people want to pat themselves on the back for creating jobs. So I think the more important thing to do is to keep American families fed and their basic needs met and employed than it is for me to have the access to find what I am looking for through shopping on ChatGPT.
Mhm. In an interview for the Power at Work blog, you said more unionization is the answer, and you've really said that already in the podcast to these labor issues and job losses caused by AI. And I read that the AFL-CIO is getting involved, and also that it has reached some kind of agreement with Microsoft on AI. I don't know the details of that. But what kinds of protections do these unions, or maybe you personally, ideally want to see put in place? In other words, what's the list of demands?
Yeah, so, the AFL-CIO and CWA did this agreement with Microsoft, this neutrality agreement. So Microsoft recognizes and has neutrality with workers who do want to organize. They'll voluntarily recognize them. And what it has done is it's been better for their business. That people stay longer in jobs that they're happier at. And you're happier when you have a voice in the workplace and when you're actually receiving pay and benefits that you deserve. And the employer will be happier because you're able to push out products that are created with pressure or people who are happy who are working on them. It sounds like a no-brainer to me. So I think some of the things that we're looking for as solutions are when companies are bringing new technology such as data centers or data training or data labeling jobs to different states, the standards should be higher on the labor practices. So governments in different states can do a labor peace agreement with those companies coming into the states. When you're talking about red states, I know that is a very tricky question, but we need to continue to educate people in the red states, in the South, in the Midwest, that they have labor rights and that they have a voice on the job. They just have to use it. So I will still think unionization and collective action is the answer in order to get these companies to give you your fair share.
Mhm. You've been very involved in public policy work and already had some successes in that area. At the federal level, I think just last week, Senators Warner and Hawley introduced a bipartisan bill called the AI Related Job Impacts Clarity Act, which requires publicly traded companies, federal agencies, and some private companies to submit quarterly reports on job losses or other workforce impacts, such as reduced hiring, that were caused by AI. Are you familiar with that bill? And if so, what do you think of it?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that, and this is probably the second time that I've seen Josh Hawley be on the right side of workers. I think, like, this is a bipartisan issue that needs to that we really need to pay attention to and push our senators and our reps towards paying attention because everybody wants, so they say, American families to have their basic needs met or be successful at work. And I think a report that outlines layoffs related to AI sounds great. But I do believe that it's going to be a huge uphill battle. I think they started on the right foot by doing a progressive Democrat and a moderate conservative to kick it off. But I think it's going to be an uphill battle because these companies they have, if this were football, they have the best defense in the league when it comes to lobbying. So they don't like the idea of reporting on, whether it's gonna be layoffs, whether it's different demographic groups in the company or things like that, because they say that it slows down production, and it's just a report. I don't see why it would get so much pushback, but you're gonna be surprised, like, you'll see it's gonna have so much pushback from a lot of people who are towing the corporate line in both parties.
Is there any other legislation, either at the state or federal level, that you're either following or maybe actively working on that you think is particularly important in connection with what we've been talking about?
Well, I do believe that the No Robo Bosses Act in California that Governor Newsom unfortunately vetoed quite recently is something that needs to be brought back to the table. I believe he gave a coalition that I'm in touch with feedback on when to bring it back and how. I think if he wants to run for president, he's going to have to prove that he's on the side of the working class and on the side of the middle class. When you're making decisions that are beneficial to these companies who dominate the tech industry as monopsonies, and you're taking action that is reflective of what the billionaires want you to do. I don't care if you're a Republican or a Democrat. It's not cool. So to bring the No Robo Bosses Act back would be great. Basically, what that bill does is it would prohibit different softwares or uses of AI in the workplace that monitor how productive employees are being or where they are, click and scroll, things like that. And most of the raters that we surveyed are automatically suspended by a robo boss. And I just think that your quantity and quality of work should be determined by a human being. We're seeing the negative implications of that work being picked apart by an AI tool. And so I think that if that bill goes back to his desk, it would be in the best interest of workers in California for him to sign it.
So I want to make sure I heard you correctly. Did you just say that I think it was the Raiders that their robo boss can actually suspend them and send them notice that they're suspended?
Yeah. So if you're an outlier on timing, quality, things like that, there's an automated suspension that goes for most of those workers at most of those companies. And then to be able to be reinstated, you're not paid during the suspension either. So it has these implications. It could take weeks or months to be reinstated, and that is done by a human. So why is a human being not looking at these outliers and making these determinations themselves or giving you would think that these companies would want the people working on AI to have feedback on how to do better and, be given clear metrics on how to make these tools safer and easier to use. But no, instead, you're just an outlier, you're suspended. Hope you get re-onboarded at some point in the future. And I just don't think that's a good way to do business in any part of the world.
Mhm. So you've alluded to the opposition and the support that big tech has. What kind of opposition have you seen from lobbyists, maybe at both levels of government? And how well organized does that lobbying effort against some of these pro worker efforts seem to be?
So in California, one of the largest opponents for any of the legislation that we push is the American Staffing Association. It is a huge lobby that advocates for staffing agencies, suppliers, extended workforce, etc. Companies like Adecco and Vaco and Cognizant and Accenture, like these huge companies have hundreds of thousands of workers all over the world, and they are putting a lot of money into being the middleman to find these workers. So they're billing companies like Google, Meta, Amazon, they're billing them per hour per head. So we call that a head count of worker. There's a lot of money in this for these middlemen. And on the other side of things, if a company like Google wanted to convert people from being a temp worker or a contractor or a vendor into a full-time employee who works directly for Google, there's usually a conversion fee that host company must pay to the staffing agency. So there's a lot of reasons why they're fighting against these things. We tried to kick off a bill that would say, hey, there should be no conversion fees when an employee converts to a full-time employee. We had serious pushback from American Staffing Association that said this is going to hurt small businesses. A lot of small businesses use temporary workers. Really, what we found through some of our research are most of these staffing agencies are huge and they have deep pockets. And then you have the typical opposition that's usually the more anti-worker branch of government, I would say the Republican Party. But you also have people who are in the Democratic Party who aren't really fighting for the working class as much as some of the others, or as much as they could be. I think that Cinema is a good example of this. Right now, she is advocating for data centers in Arizona. She used to be a Democrat. So we're just looking at this like fluidity of party, and the way that it is fluid is based on the tech industry and the direction that the tech industry is going. And it's going in the direction that the money is, the cost of the climate, at the cost of our planet, and at the cost of the middle class.
Mhm. So the strongest advocates of this of a more of a full steam ahead approach to AI might say that the job losses and other big changes since AI became practical and popular, which is really just 3 years ago, I think this month, are just the usual creative destruction of capitalism. People shouldn't try to stand in the way of it because it will ultimately benefit everyone. In fact, I saw that the AFL-CIO in its AI jobs report acknowledged this and said on its website that labor unions don't oppose AI and it has, quote, has the potential to unleash prosperity that improves working conditions and lifts us all up. So, how do you and other union organizers try to thread the needle, so to speak, of advocating for workers and improving their job security and pay without standing in the way of progress, however we define progress?
Yeah, so when we're looking at the ideas that AI and capitalism are synonymous, capitalism, it truly means like people who own capital. And there's a bunch of people who call themselves capitalists and they actually don't own any means of production or anything. They're just a worker. I think in general, like more of us are just a part of the working class and have that tied to one another more than we could say we're capitalists or socialists or anything like that. Like we're all fighting to actually be able to do things like provide for our families and meet our own basic needs and things like that. So I think it's silly that the notion that AI is making things better for everybody because capitalism, that is just silly when capitalism truly only benefits a few people who own capital. It's in the name. But when we're talking about AI, I'm not going to say AI is like all bad or it's not useful. We should get rid of it. It would cut a lot of jobs to also fight back against the technologies that we're trying to innovate. I think in some way innovation is good, but when you are profiting obscene amounts, like shareholders get dividends, why don't workers get dividends? There should be ways that we kick back some of this money to the people building these products, not lay them off, not pay them under minimum wage, not find loopholes to get away with not giving them sick time or paid training. There's like plenty of money in these products that we could actually say, hey, this is good for workers. But you have to put your money where your mouth is when you're saying this stuff.
Mhm. In your imagination, when you think about the future, and let's say it's the 15 or 20-year future from now, What might the world look like if this trend of AI taking over jobs continues to accelerate? Is that, in your imagination, is that dystopian or is it something more hopeful?
Just going to say it again. If it's replacing jobs, it's not great. There's nothing wrong, in my opinion, with going to Target and using the self checkout if that means that there's more workers available in the store to move product around, to do stock, to do returns, because we all know that customer service or guest services line is always super long. So if there's ways that automation can actually streamline like what is making these products and producing these products and selling these products, there's nothing wrong with that. But, we're seeing, in fact, that people are getting laid off and underbid instead by this product. So I think not just Congress, not just the executive branch, but also labor, including the AFL-CIO and other labor organizations, definitely need to continue to have a pulse on how this is impacting workers and continue advocating for them when it comes to saving jobs while we push forward products that are actually useful to making a lot of our lives easier and better.
Mhm. Well, Shannon, I was pretty excited to have you on the podcast because, as I said in our communications earlier, we don't often get this perspective, unfortunately, in the B2B press about AI. So it's been really great talking to you today.
It was great talking to you too. And I encourage anyone who is skeptic of anything I said to take a look at how Microsoft is dealing with their labor relations and take a note from their playbook. It's been turning out really well, and it's producing a lot of really cool video games and products that people enjoy and the workers enjoy doing it. They're staying at this company. There's a lot of things that we're not thinking of when it comes to how we're, I guess, shaping the American economy that we could actually bring back that benefits both workers and employers.
Well, thanks again for coming on the podcast.
Cool. Thanks, David.
Thank you for listening to Enterprise Apps Unpacked, where we give the real story on the software that runs your business. To learn more about business applications, explore our content on searcherp.com. Find us on YouTube at our channel, Eye on Tech. Subscribe to our podcast to receive the latest episodes as they drop. And if you liked what you heard today, give us a rating and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you're listening. Until next time.
Podcast programming and promotion, production, and quality oversight by Kelsey Waddell. Music supplied by DP via Getty Images. This is an Informa Tech Target production.